And actually, my topic is somewhat already well introduced by Elder Wilson when he spoke about the three angel messages and the beast, what it means, and so on. We will speak tonight about the number 666. And we will make a study together with you, and we hope that the Lord will bless our meeting. In Revelation chapter 13, verse 18, we read, "Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. You know, before we go into the calculation of the number of the beast, let us ask a very significant and important question. It's a simple question, but yet it is very important. And the question is the following: is this the only information we have in the Bible about the beast, about the mark of the beast? I mean, is the number 666 the only piece of information we have? Actually, we must say no. There are many other indicators that help us to identify who the beast is and the mark of the beast and so on. And just to illustrate it, you know, sometimes there is a stolen car and you drive and you hear in a radio an announcement that the police is looking for a car. And then they give a description for what car they are looking for. And here is one example. It's an Audi, it's a SUV, it has a blue color, and it is without a front bumper. Now, the question is, we ask ourselves, do they stop all blue cars, the policemen? Or do they stop all the Audis? Of course not. You see, all the indicators must fit, you know, and only then they have, you know, a car that they are suspicious for. And so it must be an Audi, it must be an SUV, it must be a blue color, and must be without a front bumper. Exactly the same situation is with the mark of the beast. The Bible has many, many indicators. And some people say, well, 660, many things can mean 666. Yes, it is true. Many things can mean it, but you know, the number must fit to all the other biblical descriptions. And this is why we will look at some other descriptions even before we go into real business of calculating the number. First of all, I would like to say that the first beast of Revelation 13 is described in a way that links him to Daniel 7. You know, and Daniel 7 really sheds additional light, but the bridges that are there are very significant, and we have to keep them in mind. For example, the first beast in Revelation 13, it is stated, is coming out of the sea, right? And when you go to Daniel 7, you have there 4 beasts, different beasts, but yet what is very interesting, they all are coming out of the sea. So there is a kind of a link, beasts coming from the same place. Then there is something else that brings them or links them together. You know, in both places, we read about 10 horns, and in both places, we have 7 heads. Now, what does it mean? For example, here you can see it. Here on top, you see the 4 beasts of Daniel 7. But let's calculate how many heads they have. You see, because one beast has 4 heads, as you know, the third one. And so when you calculate them all, you come to 7 heads. And when you come to Revelation 13, and it is explicitly stated that the beast of Revelation 13 has 7 heads. So you can see that he represents, in a sense, a summary of all the beasts of Daniel 7. Now, the first beast of Revelation 13 has additional links to Daniel 7, and especially especially to the little horn. Acts, the beast of Revelation 13 acts in a manner, in a way, like the little horn of Daniel 7. Before we really read how his activity is described, let's pay attention to a small indicator, and this is how the little horn is named. He is called a little one, a small one, a little one. And then if you continue reading chapter 7, Daniel, book of Daniel, you will find that the small one, the little one, has become larger in appearance than all his associates. I went to Google, and since, Daniel 7, the angel, when he explains, when the angel explains to Daniel what the horns are meaning, it is very clear that the horns are representing, kingdoms, or today we say countries, and kings, and so on. And so I went to Google and I Googled, what is the smallest country in the world? It's very interesting. The Google gave me immediately, it's Vatican. And then I asked myself, okay, if Vatican is the smallest country today, is it the most influential or not? Is it represented in more countries than probably the influence of any other country? And so when you go and see, you will find that almost in every country on the earth, this small country has representation and has significant influence. And just by this description, describing the horn, the papacy with the word little, actually points very clearly, and everyone who just thinks a little bit has already some kind of indicators what it really means. But then we really look at the acts, what actions, are undertaken by the beast of Revelation 13. It's described that he speaks out blasphemous names. He speaks arrogant words, and so on. This is the actual description of the behavior of the beast of Revelation 13. Then you go to chapter 7 in the book of Daniel, and you see that the little horn is actually acting in the same way. He speaks boastful words. He's uttering great boasts, speaking against the Most High, and veers down the saints, attempts even to alternate times and the law. So you have additional light here that really helps us to identify the beast of Revelation 13, and also, as we will see, will help us later in discovering and calculating the number. Now, what is also very interesting, that in both places, in Revelation 13 and in Daniel 7, both are given authority for the same time period. In Revelation 13, we read 42 months, which is 3.5 years. And using the year-day principle, it brings us to 1260 years. Now, in Daniel 7, you see that the little horn has been given the same time, times, and half a time, which is 3.5 years, which also are 1260 years. But what is even more significant, and what will really help us in actually understanding and calculating the number of the beast, is to see and recognize that, the beast of Revelation 13 has an attempt. He attempts to imitate the true Christ, but in reality, he is just presenting a counterfeit. Let's see only some examples. We will not go into the depths, but we will see some examples. For example, in Revelation 13, verse 2, it is stated that the dragon gave to the beast the power and the throne and great authority. So it's just keep in mind the movement. The dragon gives power to the beast. And you will recognize that you have already seen something similar in Revelation chapter 2, verse 27, where it is stated that God the Father has given authority to the Son, to the Lamb, to Jesus Christ. And you see, Satan is trying to imitate. He says, God the Father is giving to his Son, to Jesus Christ, to the Lamb, authority. And so he also presents himself as someone who gives the authority to the beast. Here you see an attempt to really imitate through Christ, presenting a counterfeit. Then when you read in Revelation 13:3, it is stated, I saw one of his heads as if it had been slain. And then you read Revelation chapter 5, verse 6. Lamb is described, Jesus Christ is presented and described as if slain. Now, in Greek, you have the same words. You know, it is actually, when it comes to the beast, it's a reference that a deadly wound was afflicted to him. But in reality, it is described in words that actually tries to imitate Christ, because Christ, you know, was presented as the one who was slain, who gave his life. And now, you know, the beast also wants to imitate Christ. So even the deadly wound is described in ways of trying to imitate Christ. Then in the same verse 3, chapter 13, it is stated that his fatal wound was healed. And here you can see kind of an allusion to the resurrection, because the lamb was slain, but it raised up, you know, and here the beast is trying to imitate in a way also. And then it is stated in the next verse, Revelation 13:4, and they worshiped the beast, saying, who is like the beast? And immediately you remember that you have heard this question somewhere. And when you read, for example, Revelation chapter 12, verse 7, and there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels waging war with the dragon. And when you try to translate and understand the meaning of the name Michael, and you know from Hebrew it means who is like God. And even here you see the beast wants to imitate Christ, because Michael, whose name means who is like God, now here we see that the people who worship the beast are asking almost a question that comes very close, but it is a counterfeit. Who is like the beast? Then we continue and we see additional parallels. For example, Revelation chapter 13, verse 5. An authority was given 40 months to the beast, 42 months. And let me ask you, how long was the ministry of Jesus on this earth? You know very well that Jesus was teaching his disciples. He ministered on this earth 3.5 years. Now, how many months are in 3.5 years? 42 months. You see, even here, the beast tries to imitate Christ. Then when we go to Revelation 13:7, it is stated, authority over every tribe and people and tongue and nation was given to him, to the beast. And you know immediately that the scope of activities, the scope of influence that dragon and the beast is trying to achieve is actually the scope that is Christ's mission. Because in Revelation 14:6, when the three angel messages are introduced, we hear, and I saw another angel flying in mid-heaven, having an eternal gospel to preach to those who live on the earth, and to every nation and tribe and tongue and people. You see the same wording. You can see the same wording here, because when you look, it is the same. People, tongues, nations, and tribes, the same, different order, but the same description. And here you can see again an attempt to counterfeit, to imitate Christ. Now, the books of Daniel and Revelation provide enough information to identify the beast as we have seen. But we have to also say the following. The mark of the beast will also be an attempt to counterfeit actually everything God does. For example, we know that the Bible speaks about the seal of God and Sabbath being the seal of God. And here the seventh day, the Sabbath. And you can expect that the mark of the beast will be also an attempt to counterfeit it. Now, let's, having said that, let's go and try to understand more in detail the actual number 666, what it really means. The first question that we should ask, is 666 the number of the name of the beast or not? Because in the text we read, nothing is said about the name. Here is a text, Revelation 13:18. Here is wisdom. Let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. So you can see here his number, the beast's number is 666. Does it has to do something with the name of the beast or not? And here we will find help when we read verses, the previous verses, actually, when we look into the context. When you go to Revelation 13 and read 16 and 17, let's read it together. And he causes all, the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the free men and the slaves, to be given a mark on their right hand or on their forehead. And he provides that no one will be able to buy or to sell except the one who has the mark, either the name of the beast or the number of his, what does the text says? Or the number of his name. So indeed, the number has something to do with the name. And the same you will find in Revelation chapter 15, verse 2, where it is stated, and I saw something like a sea of glass mixed with fire, and those who had been victorious over the beast and his image and the number of his name, standing on the sea of glass, holding harps of God. Here you can see that those who have, those who are victorious and standing, on the sea of glass, they are victorious over the beast and over his image and over his the number of his name. So you can see again that the name has to do, or the number is connected to the name. But the very next question we have to ask, what does actually name means in the book of Revelation? Because it can mean a proper name, or it can mean something else. And we ask ourselves, what does usually name means in the book of Revelation? Does it mean a proper name? Yes, of course, it can mean a proper name, like Paul, Peter, etc. But in this case, what does it mean? A proper name, or rather a description of a behavior? So let's see in other places in the book of Revelation. For example, when we go to Revelation chapter 17 and verse 5, we read here. And here, the woman sitting on the beast is described. And on her forehead a name was written, a mystery, Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of abominations of the earth. So you can see it's not just a proper name, it's a little bit more, because it's actually describing the character of the person. It's describing the behavior of the person. It's describing the values of the person. It's a Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots and of abominations of the earth. When we go to other places, for example, in chapter 19, we find a number of description or expressions what a name actually means. And let's read it. Verse 11, and I saw heaven opened, and behold, a white horse, and he who sat on it is called, and then the name is given. You see, and it's more than just a proper name. Faithful and true. So again, you see that the name is rather a description of a behavior, of a character, of the values. And then in verse 13, chapter 19, we read something similar. He is clothed with a robe dipped in blood, and his name is called the Word of God. In verse 16 again, and on his robe and on his thigh, he has a name written, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. So you see here again the same situation. And so we can say that actually a name in the book of Revelation can mean much more than just simply a proper name. It can mean a description, referred to a description of a status, description of a behavior, description of activity. But before we continue, let's look what Ellen White counsels us in the book Great Controversy, page 342. She is asking a question. Why then this widespread ignorance concerning an important part of holy writings? And when you read it in context, it becomes very clear that she is speaking about the book of Revelation. So she's asking, why then this widespread ignorance concerning an important part of the holy writings, the book of Revelation? Why this general reluctance to investigate its teachings? And then she provides an answer. And I think the answer will also give us some hints for our topic. And she says, it is the result of a studied effort of the Prince of Darkness to conceal from man that which reveals his deceptions. So now you ask yourself a question. Does the number of the name of the beast reveals, the beast's deceptions? If yes, then you will meet, while trying to understand it, you will meet efforts of the Prince of Darkness to conceal it from men so that they would not understand it. Otherwise, his deceptions will be revealed. So we have to keep it in mind as we continue. And then at the very end, I will also show you another very important quotations when it comes exactly to the mark of the beast, where Ellen White gives us some warning and invites us to be open, because at the end, we might discover something that we will be surprised. Then when we look at the actual number 666 in the book of Revelation, this is the first thing you do whenever you meet a phrase or a word or a number and you try to understand it. The first thing, before doing anything else, the first thing you ask yourself, does this word or does this phrase or does this number occurs somewhere else in the Bible? Because when you try to understand the phrase or you try to understand the word, you go to other places and see how the biblical writers were understanding this phrase, this number, and so on, because the Bible interprets itself. Of course, sometimes we have words or phrases that occur only once, we call them hapax legomenon, and then you have to use other methods. But here we ask ourselves first, does the number 666 appears somewhere else in the Bible? And we discover that indeed it occurs twice in the Bible, once in the Old Testament and once in the New Testament. In the Old Testament, it is found in the book 1 Kings, chapter 10, verse 14. And here you can see it in Hebrew, in Greek, and in English. Why I have put here Hebrew and Greek? Because when you look how the Septuagint has translated 666, you will see it's the same way like in the book of Revelation, in chapter 13, verse 18, it is presented, the same phrase. And in the 1 King, chapter 10, verse 14, we read, Now the weight of gold which came into Solomon in 1 year was 666 talents of gold. Now you can see here a language of business. You are almost in a marketplace. You know, you have talents of gold, you have here taxes in a way brought to Solomon yearly, you know, 666. But when you go to the book of Revelation, you also discover that the name of the beast, the number of the name of the beast is connected to business as well. It's a commercial language because it is stated those who don't have the number of the name of the beast will not be able to do what? To buy or to sell. So it's even more interested now, more interesting for us, because you not only have the same number here, but you have a context of business, a context of buying, selling, you know, and stuff like that. So it's even more interesting for us. And so when you discover, when you study carefully the first book of Kings, you will discover the following. Up to chapter 10, Solomon is described as a faithful king, as someone who is the wisest on the earth, someone who is blessed by God, someone who worships the true God and tries to please the Lord. This is Solomon, how he is presented till chapter 10. Then in chapter 10, suddenly this number of gold, 666 talents of gold are presented. And then immediately the next chapter, from verse 1, chapter 10, chapter 11, verse 1 and the following, you will see that suddenly the attention of Solomon is moved from the true God to a false God, from the true God to a counterfeit God. And why? Because the wives of Solomon have directed his attention to idols. And now the faithful king who worshiped the true God suddenly starts worshiping the idols, the counterfeit gods. And actually you again see the same context of trying to present a counterfeit. And already we know that the business of the beast is actually to imitate Christ, but to present something which is not true. So to link our attention away from the true God, from the true worship, from the true day of worship, to false gods, to idols, to false worship, to false day of worship. So although the reference in the first king doesn't give us all the answers, but it gives us an idea. It provides us a context. So the same picture we have seen throughout comparing the book of Revelation with Daniel 7 and so on, we see the same here. It is something that links or tries to attract our attention away from the true God, from the true worship to the idols. And so the number 666 has to do with it. Now let's go to the book of Revelation and see, let's do a very short excursus into the history. Already from the 2nd century, we find Irenaeus, you know, that tries to interpret the name of the beast using gematria. It's a way where you try to provide a numerical value to the letters of the alphabet. And now what is very interesting in Hebrew alphabet, in Greek alphabet, and in the Latin alphabet, you have a numerical value for the letters of the alphabet. And it's easy to calculate, you know, what a numerical value is of this name or the other name. Now we know from history, from early history, especially people who have been in love, you know, and you know, I don't know how it is in the Philippines. I know that in Eastern Europe, when the tourists are visiting places, they sometimes write the name of the wives they like, or the girls they like, or something else, you know, on mountains, on wood, and so on. But in the ancient times, we have seen and we have some evidence where people were representing someone they love, but instead of the actual name, alphabetical name, they would use a number. But the challenge was, you could, with a different combination of different alphabetical letters, you could come up with different names that all would have the same number. And so, but the very fact that it was used is interesting. And so what is interesting that Irenaeus has actually suggested that the beast is actually Antichrist, and the numerical value of the letters of his name will add up to 666. But at the same time, to be fair to Irenaeus, we must say that he also warned about the danger that we can come up with all kinds of interesting ideas here. But what is very interesting also, that he himself was, and some of his followers were trying to see in the emperors of Rome some antichrists, and they were trying to present, for example, Neron as someone whose numerical value is 666 and so on. But let's move to the Reformation. Martin Luther, when Martin Luther came along, of course, people ask him, what does it mean, 666? What does the number of the name means? So Martin Luther had a very interesting way of interpreting it. He said that the number 666 is referring to the number of years that, Antichrist will rule. Of course, then people were, asking, and I haven't found a real answer from him. What he means, is it 666 after the wound, deadly wound is healed, or he meant a different period? But the very fact that he was trying to interpret it in this way is significant. Now, 50 years later, after Martin Luther gave his interpretation, one of his followers, a brilliant scholar, a scholar who was very well, trained in Greek, in Hebrew, and in Latin. His name is Andreas Helwig. He actually was saying that 666 is referring to papacy, and the numerical value of the title of the Pope represents 666. Now, Andreas Helwig has suggested 4 papal titles that all represented the number 666. The most known are the 2. One is Dux Cleri, which means chief of all clergy, if you translate it, chief of all clergy. And so Helwig said, since the Antichrist, since the beast represents papacy, and since the official language of papacy is Latin, we have to take the Latin titles of the papacy and try to see if the numerical value of them will be 666. And he said, indeed, there are 4 titles of the papacy that bring us to the number 666. And the 2 most significant one is Dux Cleri, and the second one, Vicarius Filii Dei. And so he said, if you calculate Vicarius Filii Dei, bring the numbers together, and I will show how it is laid out, and I think all of you know very well, it really brings to the number 666. Now, when the Protestants started to use it, then the Catholics, they have responded. And it is very interesting that the Catholics have also responded with a gematria. And they have used the same methodology. And they have tried to show that Luther, the name of Luther, actually also means the number 666, and Calvin as well. So they were saying, you're saying it is a papacy, but we are saying this as the reformers. They are representing, the mark of the beast. And look, Martin Luther, his name actually can be laid out and presented in the number 666, and Calvin as well. Now, let's zero in a little bit on the gematria. There are simple gematria and a very, I would say, quite dangerous gematria, because some interpreters have used a gematria, and they said, you have to take a biblical text, and for example, you find the word, you find translated to a numerical value, and then you have to replace it with another word that has the same numerical value, and only then you can come to the deep meaning of scripture. But this is actually, that leads away from the clear, what the Bible, clear way how the Bible presents truth. So this can lead to very dangerous ways of interpreting. But the simple gematria has been used by a number of rabbis, early on and up to now. The most simple or the most known examples how they have used it is, for example, the name David. The King David. When you take the name David and put a numerical value to the name David, you will come with a numerical value 14, 1-4. And then, when you go to the New Testament, when you have the chronology of Jesus Christ, you know how it is presented in sections 14, 14, and so on, leading to David. And this is why they explain, this is why it is done, because the name David by itself means 14. This is why this is used for presenting the chronology, of Jesus Christ. Or for example, they interpret when it comes to Genesis 14, 14, when it is described that Abraham took his servants and went, and trying to release Lot, his nephew, that was taken away by a number of kings, by an army of several kings. And it is stated that Abraham took with him 318 servants. And they say, well, why does Moses writing this in the book of Genesis, why he is making emphasis that there were 318? And then, some rabbis say it is because the true servant of Abraham was Eliezer. And if you try to find the numerical value of Eliezer, it is exactly 318. And they were saying that although Abraham had many servants, but in reality, he had only one, and he even thought that this will be the one who will be, taking his lineage, because he had no sons at that time. Or, for example, some try to use the same gematria in interpreting, in John 21:11, where it is described that they have catched 153 fish. And they say, the name Passover actually means 153. Or, the sons of God also means 150. So they use the gematria to explain it. So it is not something new. It has been used throughout the centuries. And now Andreas Helvig has suggested that Vicarius Filidae is probably the best title to describe the character of papacy. And it is really presenting the number 666. And also Andreas Helvig has suggested how the word vicar should be understood. Being a specialist in Latin, he said that the word vicar means a representative of or substitute for. So it can be mean positively. For example, if an embassy, the embassy of the Philippines, let's say in one country, the embassy is representing the Philippines, the country. So it's a positive. You try to actually be a voice of the original in a sense. But then he also said it can be used in a negative sense as a replacement, as the substitute for. And so when he was referring to the title of the papacy Vicarius Filidae, he was trying to show it in a negative sense, an attempt to replace. So actually you can see again the same way as the beast always tried to do. It's always an attempt, as we have seen, to imitate or to present a counterfeit. And here a vicar in the same sense, an attempt to actually present something else. Because the vicarious Filii was actually trying to change the true day of worship to the false day of worship, changing the laws, times, and so on. Here you can see how we come to the number 666. You all know it very well because you have used it, I think, in the evangelistic series, especially in the series that Mark Finley has presented and sent out to all pastors throughout the world. This slide is represented there, and it is correctly calculated here how the Vicarious Filii is presenting 666. Now, we have to say the following, that the first time that we know of, or a document where the title Vicarious Filii was used, was in the document that is called Donation of Constantine. And apparently, you know, supposedly the Donation of Constantine, the document was written on March 30 in 315 by Constantine himself to Pope Sylvester I. Now, this document was not known till the 7th century. It was then when the document was suddenly discovered. And it was a very interesting circumstance when the document was discovered. It was when, you know, in Italy, you know, the secular government wanted to tax the papacy because they were not paying any taxes, and yet they were owning so much property. And so they actually were forcing the papacy to pay taxes. And then suddenly the papacy, you know, they found a document that apparently was written by Constantine himself. And the document was actually stating that although Constantine was, you know, moving to another place, establishing a new capital, Constantinople, but he was giving Rome to the papacy. And it was a gift to them, and it was there, so they did not need to pay taxes for that and so on. So this was how the document appeared. But in the document, here we find the title Vicarious Filii, and it was already applied to the first pope in the document. And they believed, as you know, that Peter was, you know, the first pope, and the title Vicarious Filii is here. But in the 15th century, it was actually proven that this was actually is Donation of Constantine is a false document. It was created, you know, it was a counterfeit document in a sense. It was an imitation of a true document, but in reality, Constantine never wrote such a document. It was proven in the 15th century. And so when this has become known, and then some people have raised the question, well, if the title Vicarious Filii has been used in this document, and we know that it is a fake document, how can we rely and really believe that Vicarious Filii was really used? And many have actually, evangelists have used the argument that Vicarious Filii is found on the crown, on the tiara of Pope. And yet the Catholics themselves have told there is no tiara in the Vatican. There is no crown of Pope where you can find the inscription Vicarious Filii. And in reality, you know, you cannot find it in Vatican on the tiara. Why? First of all, we know that when the deadly wound was afflicted to the papacy, you know, the armies that surrounded and overtook Vatican, they have destroyed and taken away a lot of precious stuff and many crowns. So now in Vatican, you can find not more than 20 crowns. Looks like many popes, you know, had their own tiaras and their own crowns. And this is why they said you cannot find it on the crown of the Pope. And this is a reality, it's not there. And then many said, well, since it's not on the tiara, probably it's a false way of interpreting, and we probably should leave this Vicarious Filii and move on to new ways of interpreting. But what is very interesting, although we cannot find it on the crown, but we can find a number of documents and writings of historians that used, the word vicar, actually applied to the Pope. And even when you read the Great Controversy, you will find a number of quotations where Ellen White quotes historians and quotes reformers, and where they also were using the word vicar from direct quotes, vicar as referring to papacy. Now, there is something else we have to keep in mind. When you try to present a false document, for example, like it was done in the 7th century, when, a fake document was quickly created in order to prove that the papacy was not obliged to pay taxes. When you try to make a fake document, do you write everything false in the document, or you write everything correct, everything right, you use the right titles, everything right, and only one item that you are interested in, you make it, you squeeze it so it will fit to your purposes. Of course, this is a way. And this is why, for me, for example, the very fact that the document, the Nation of Constantine, was actually created, it was, as a false document, tells me, since the purpose was really to show that the land and the Rome really belongs to a papacy, it was given as a gift and they don't have to pay taxes, then for me it is very clear that they would everything else write very clearly that would really correspond with the truth. And it has nothing to do with trying to put under question the title Vicarius Feridae. Even in the magazine Christianity Today, you will find a number of articles that say that the Nation of Constantine in the Middle Ages was actually used very powerfully as a true document. And actually, when the Catholic Church split with the Eastern Church in the 11th century, this document was also used against, those who wanted to split and so on. So let's continue on, and we will see that because of these challenges with this title, a number of other interpretations have been suggested. Some have suggested that 666, it's actually a numeric, symbolic number. And the argumentations, those who go this way, they're saying that most of the numbers, 144,000, for example, is a symbolic number. Then everything needs to be a symbolic number. But of course, we have to keep in mind, of course, 666 is symbolic because it refers to the name. So you have to discover the significance of it. And those who go this way, they try to point to a 666. And they say that the number 7 is a number of perfection, and number 6 is one short of perfection, and thus why it represents a rebellion, a apostasy. Of course, you can make a case of it, although you have to also keep in mind that not always 7 is connected with some positive things, although it represents perfection and totality. But also you can say that number 6 sometimes points to positive things in the Bible, because when Isaiah saw God, the vision of God, he saw the angels that had each 6 wings. So it can also be a neutral or a positive even number, but although it is true that it's a number of rebellion and so on. But the big question is, we have to ask ourselves, does the Bible speak about the 666, 666, or the Bible speaks about the numerical value of 666? So what does the biblical text tell us? And we come again to Revelation 13:18, and we read, here is wisdom, let him who has understanding calculate the number of the beast, for the number is that of a man, and his number is 666. So it is not XXX or 666. It is very clearly written out. The number is 666. This is number one. Number two, it is stated calculate, add up. What this word, psyphizato, actually means to calculate, to sum up. This word is used only twice in the New Testament. It is used here in Revelation and in Luke 14:28. And it has a similar understanding. For which of you desiring to build a tower does not first sit down and count the cost, whether he has enough to complete it or not? You know how you sit down and how you calculate. When you want to build a tower, you all probably have been building some houses or whatever, and you have to calculate how much bricks, how much bricks you need, how much it will cost, and then how much wood you need, how much it will, and then you calculate all together. You sum it up, and then you come to a number. And here, this is what is used in Revelation 13:18. It invites us to calculate, to really bring out, to sum up. And then, of course, and it refers to the name, and it asks us to calculate, and it says it is a human name, and then it says, and the number of the name is 666. Then, of course, it makes more sense that you have to calculate and bring it together, and the result should be 666. I would like to suggest that 666 very clearly points to the one who acts like vicarius filii Dei. And what it means is the following. We don't have to look to find, vicarius filii Dei on the crown of the Pope's crown. We don't have to look and count and find it, the title vicarius filii Dei on the clothes by someone. But we have to look who is acting like vicarius filii Dei, vicarius in a negative sense. Who is acting like someone who tries to imitate? Who is acting like someone who tries to, replace the true Christ? Who is acting like trying to replace the true day of worship? Who is acting? Of course, vicarius filii Dei fits very, very well. And we can really be at peace and understand that really vicarius filii Dei can mean it. Of course, we have to also recognize that after the Second Vatican Council, the Catholic Church, for example, has used the vicarius, as applying to all the priests. This is also a very interesting nuance. But how it went through history, and especially when the 1260 days, the beast was working, and the vicarius filii Dei was recognized at that time, and the vicarius filii Dei really meant what the whole activities of the beast have been meaning. But having said all of that, we have to keep in mind the Testimonies, volume 6, page 17, what Ellen White is saying. She says, the light we have received upon the third angel's message is the true light. The mark of the beast is exactly what it has been proclaimed to be. Exactly what it has been proclaimed to be. Meaning, that it always tries to counterfeit and imitate the true God through Christ, through day of worship, and so on. But then she adds, not all in regard to this matter is yet understood. Nor will it be understood, until the unrolling of the scroll. But a most solemn work is to be accomplished in our world. So what is very interesting, the image of the beast is being in process developed. We are not yet there. Those who worship, those who don't have this number cannot buy or sell. This has not happened yet. It can be that we will be surprised, and when it will be implemented, that we will see it even more clearer. But so far, from all the knowledge we have, we can really with assurance say that we are not looking for the number or the title vicarius filii Dei on the clothes on the theatre, on the, you know, on the crown, but we look on the beast who is trying to imitate Christ, who is trying to work in a sense, negative sense of a vicarious Filii. And in this sense, we are safe to point to vicarious Filii as 666. Thank you very much for your attention. I hope I have not confused you, and I hope I got through clear, and may the Lord bless us. Thank you very much.